Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room, a little show that endeavors to shine a light on the big issues in Victoria, Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada, the wide world. I'm Robin Adair, and across that wide expanse, all the way to Saanich, is my partner in crime, my partner with the most, the world's best co-host, John Tarisic. And Johnny, it seems like downtown parking is becoming another issue for the city. It's a thing I know a lot of big cities wrestle with, is when to have parking free and at what point do you have to pay on the meter. In Victoria, for years and years, 6 o'clock, that meant you could park your vehicle downtown, but no more.
What's it going to take, Robin? What's it going to take to have folks that make decisions that are in power be friendly to business and understand business's critical role in a community, right? So this parking thing, if you want to slip downtown for a morning breakfast meeting, an appointment, or even a haircut, you now have to pay more. City Hall says it doesn't have enough money to cover the new police budget to deal with out-of-control crime downtown. But now they'll have funds assigned for cultural events and other fun, thanks to public paid parking. It's now going to be 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., where you'll have to plug the meter. Like, I'm astounded. My head's going to, as with many of our shows, my head is going to go, this is all happening at the same time that downtown businesses struggle to recover from the pandemic. When are we going to have friendly policies towards family-owned and employed businesses? This is all following on the heels of the bike lane construction, which have removed street parking throughout the city. People are upset at this council, and we've had letters written and sent into not really written, but certainly sent into us on the Rumble Room.
I think they've been typed electronically, but we have them. And boy, people are fired up. A well-crafted note from Walter. And Walter is a well-regarded community leader here on the South Island. We appreciate his input. And he writes, "We get the municipal councillors that get the votes of the majority of voters. The majority of voters voted for ideologists who formed the majority on Victoria Council." Walter says, in the words of Shakespeare no less, "The fault is in ourselves." And he goes on to say this: "The NDP and Greens work very hard at getting their supporters to the polls. We free enterprisers don't work hard enough to get our voters motivated and out to vote. Not much will change until we do."
You know, Robin, I'm going to just keep saying this until my head or something happens to my brain. Enough is enough. Another rather blunt assessment from Don, who states, "The social engineering by a group of no experience, no brain municipal politicians has got to stop." He goes on to say, "Pick up my garbage, patch the potholes. It's that simple. Woke my ass."
Well, so certainly buttons have been pressed, John, and it'll be fascinating to see if this rookie council, a lot of people are first-time councillors in the city of Victoria. They're taking a lot of very strong steps and are getting pushback. Do they learn from this? We'll have to wait and see. And speaking of governing, let's shift off to Justin Trudeau as he continues with all of his struggles.
Absolutely. I don't know if I can calm down, Robin, because enough is enough. Needless to say, the entire controversy about election interference by the Chinese government is a bee in his bonnet. And who knows? Maybe this time the sting will have a lasting effect. There's no question his approval rating is shaky, and his future is in question. I mean, it's a minority government. Meantime, it appears the Tories are making political hay.
And you have to think Justin Trudeau is paying attention. You have to see the indications of the momentum that's taking place. And, the Conservative Party seems to be really building with its new leader, Pierre Poilivre. And you only have to look at a recent open air, it was at an air hangar gathering, attracted nearly 2,000 people out in Sydney, and Pierre Poilivre holding court. And they chirped that this crowd, this is the detractors, chirped that this crowd was very white. But let's face it, Victoria in general is not famous for its ethnic diversity. But this was, for the most part, a pretty diverse crowd, people of all ages jamming in to listen. It reminds me a lot of events that took place in the late 80s and 90s. Remember Preston Manning and the Reform Party movement? And it really took hold across the West and into Ontario. And it seemed like even places like Nanaimo and Port Alberni jumped on board, places that we would have traditionally thought were strongly stamped union towns, big labor movement. They jumped to the Reform Party because people felt that power elites were running the show in the country and they didn't like it. And I believe that this same kind of feeling is being stirred by Poilivre and the Conservatives right now. Now, I know many people don't like him. You may not like him, but you have to admit there's momentum going on there. There could be a seismic shift, and we'll keep an eye on it. But John, it's time now to shift again to something we can all agree on. That's the housing market, which, to say the least, of this last year has been pretty topsy-turvy.
I need something we can all agree on, Robin. In recent stats, housing sales are down over 40% across the country compared to 1 year ago. Depending where you live, prices are down around 10%. Although as interest rates stabilize, prices seem to be doing the same thing. So we decided time to talk about this. So if we're going to talk real estate, we should ask Tony Joe to join us, one of the island's, if not the province's, top realtors. Let's zoom him in.
Joining us in the Victoria Rumble Room for the first time, a very familiar face to many people because he does a fair amount of media, and he's a familiar voice because he does a fair amount of radio. And I know he's excited about being on this show because he wants to play with the big boys. Tony Joe, great to have you on the Rumble Room.
Thanks for having me, both of you.
And Tony, when interest rates started to go up, there was a real general thought, I think widely held, that interest rates were going to be really bad for the housing market. And both on the island and across the rest of the country, the anticipation was that the market was going to be rocked, that the price of homes was going to drop, that people were going to be walking away from mortgages because they wouldn't be able to pay for them. And at this point, it just doesn't seem like much of this has happened. Maybe some aspects of it, the market has had to readjust, but it certainly hasn't collapsed. Didn't interest rates make a difference?
Oh, they did. They sure did. I think they did what the Bank of Canada was hoping was going to happen, which is it slowed the upwards trajectory. Because, let's face it, things were going crazy, right? There's countless stories of people who, they paid $200,000, $400,000 over list price, unconditional offers. It was a crazy marketplace, ideal for sellers. But, we in the real estate community, we take care of buyers as well, too. And it was a really unfriendly market to be in as a buyer. Many of your listeners are people who were there, they lost out on 5, 10 multiple offer situations, sometimes their dream home, and they were outbid by somebody who still needed to get a mortgage, but they were willing to say, we'll make it unconditional. We won't bother with an inspection and all that. So, here we are now. We're almost a year afterwards because it feels like the peak was about April or May of 2022. And what has happened? It slowed the upwards trajectory. Prices have softened, but you're right, Robin. We've all, the three of us, we've been in this game for long enough. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from people, oh, the market's going to drop 50%. You just wait. Right?
Yeah.
And it's so funny. I stopped keeping track of these people because the reality is, no. It can't, and there's a number of reasons. We can only really talk about locally here in Victoria. We have a very special place. Point is, almost everyone here that the three of us bump into on a daily basis, they have come from somewhere else, right? Myself and my family, my cousin Charlene, we are born and raised here in Victoria. We've never left. John, I think it's cute when people say, ostensibly Victoria, because it's not true. That's not born and raised. You came, right?
I came from a foreign environment, Tony. Before I totally. I want to refer back to a few years from now. First of all, I want to say how great it is to speak to you. I mean, our paths have crossed, you and I,
many times,
and I don't even know where, right? But I feel like I've known you for a long time. So let's go back to that time. We'll recall when the price of homes really began to spike, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in the early 90s. At that time, there was significant immigration from overseas, specifically Hong Kong, and a belief at that time that foreign buyers were paying overprice and driving up costs. But it slowly became clear that it's really been property speculation and flipping by Canadians that helps drive up the price. So what do you say to people who still believe it's foreign purchasers who's driving up the market?
I remember I was on CFAX once on a call-in show with I can't remember who it was, and it's funny because a caller called and said, "Oh, there's all these people who are buying, and they're foreigners, and they're holding properties, and they're not moving in, and that's not fair use of a property. It should go to a local, and it should, affordability is important and all that stuff." And I can't remember what happened, but I was able to identify that particular property because I knew the neighbor, or a friend of mine knew the neighbor. And at a later date, and of course, this is the terrible thing, unfortunate thing about a call-in show is you can't follow up and talk to that guy. But as it turned out, that house was vacant because they were applying for a building permit for a renovation. And yes, the buyer was Asian, whether they were Chinese or Korean or Japanese, I don't know, but they were Asians from Vancouver. So they were not a foreign buyer, and they were not a speculator. They were somebody who, came from Canada, and it's this perception, right? And John, going back to what you were talking about, it was all that whole Hong Kong, when the lease was up, 1997, I think it was, right? And there was all that speculation about, people were coming back to Canada, and to some degree there was. Let's face it, Vancouver, kind of like that satellite.
Yaletown was built by the Hong Kong Chinese.
Yes.
You can go into the west side of Vancouver out towards UBC. There are whole street blocks that were purchased by people back in Hong Kong because they did not want to take any chance that if the Chinese Communist government got into Hong Kong and clamped things down, that they had no B plan. And so they sent their kids here to go to school. Sometimes half their family lives here, and there's half the family living back in Hong Kong. And what's wrong with that?
Yeah, well, and it was their home for many years. Like there's a lot of second, maybe even third generation now Hong Kong Chinese that are in British Columbia, right? But they're Canadians, right? So going back to this whole notion about foreign buyers, let's think of a few things. The speculation of vacancy tax came in. The foreign buyer property transfer tax came in. That's that extra 20%, right, on $1 million home. These were measures that were meant to actually, they were meant to make housing affordable. That's what the government said, right? And let's just think about what's happened in the, whatever it is, 4 years that those have been implemented. It's far from, it's done nothing. Right. I don't know about you guys. I have my speculation and vacancy tax form right here that I've got to fill out because, of course, we all got to do that to make sure the government knows that, I'm declaring that I'm using the house. It makes one wonder all of this effort that is going into identifying speculation of vacancy tax. And there was a report a while ago how much money was raised, how much money and effort has been used to administer this program. And as a tax-paying British Columbian, I wonder if those efforts could go somewhere else. just thinking about the development costs and the cost of things, we all know that. I mean, we go to the grocery store and we see things are more expensive now than they were. I think we come to accept that because of the fact that, we're still living on the tail end of this whole notion of supply chain issues and labor shortages and all that kind of stuff. Um, the thing about Victoria that I think people often forget about, I do think it's cute, by the way, when people come to us and say, we've got this great idea. We're going to move to Victoria. To which, in the back of my mind, I go, that's really cute. But you know what? You're not the first person. Right. Following up with, what we were saying before, where you guys are from or where everyone is from, when I'm in a room, it's rare that 5% of the people are born and raised Victorians. Everyone has come from somewhere else. Right.
Well, the building I'm living in here, and I won't say exactly where it is, but since I moved back to Victoria, I was away for a few years, and we came
Yeah.
back and bought a condo. And I don't have to worry about people around my building recognizing me for my television years, because almost everybody in my building's from Alberta.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, Tony, I'm going to let's get political. Yeah. Let's get
Great.
political. All right. We've been watching the 1,500 suite Harris Green rental development.
Yep.
Listening, hearing all kinds of stuff. And Victoria Council's drive to limit parking, to force people to ride bikes or take buses. Suppose that's okay.
Or pay for parking at night.
However, I should also add there are proposals from some developers to build condos and townhouses with no parking, with none. So this is all happening as rental construction is just getting back on its feet. In your opinion, how will new home buyers and renters feel about a carless future?
Yeah, all I need to do is think about some of the early examples, right? So the Mosaic on Fort Street, which was previously a government building and it converted. My family grocery store was just the next block up. So I remember that building when it was a government building. That was one of the early ones. That was I think it was 1998 or 1999. And then we look at Mermaid Wharf that came in down on the harbor about a year afterwards. They were all those micro suites, right? The sort of the big now. I mean, they're 400 square feet. We thought they were tiny at the time, but they didn't have parking. And we always thought, who's going to buy these and how will this turn out? As it turns out, they are marketable, and there are people that live in town and they exist downtown. The thing that I will say is, in with those two particular buildings, there seems to be more sort of churn because I think what happens is you buy a unit like that, get into the real estate market, but then what happens is you get in a relationship. And then you have a other half and you can't fit in the place together. And then you got to sell and, move to the next one, but they remain saleable. And it's not like units at the Mosaic are impossible to sell despite the fact that they don't have parking, right? I often think about, are we moving towards that European community sort of thing? Like the whole Amsterdam, right? I was in the UK over Christmas time, and it is a much more pedestrian community. It bothers me because I'm a driver. I like to drive. I like to get around. I bemoan the bike lanes just like anyone else. I have not partaken in the bike lanes. I really should, right? I got young kids. We should actually try it out one of these days. Um, uh, I I feel that this is probably the way it has to go, just as far as economics are concerned, because of course, that whole adding the parking is extra cost, and the question is if the market will bear that cost, right?
Well, you're being very kind about this issue about us being moved towards a non-car culture when we come from a car culture, unlike
Yeah,
places like Amsterdam, unlike places like traditionally China.
yeah,
I was at an event once where Gregor Robertson, who was a big bike proponent in Vancouver, had these Chinese delegates from Beijing, and he said, "Boy, you're so many years ahead of us because Beijing, the bicycle is king in Beijing. You're so many years ahead." And they were looking at him like he was out of his mind. Because people in China, the first thing they want to do when they've made it is get a car. And they have massive highways. Now, I mean, I'm not saying cars are great in terms of course, the pollution aspect and parking and all these things have to be managed. But I mean, there'll be ways for us to move to cleaner technologies for cars. And I still don't think people really want to go grocery shopping in a bus. But We're just about done with you, Tony. You'll be happy to know, and I'm not going to preach at you because I think we actually agree on this. But I did want to ask you before we let you go, the housing market right now, it's been up and down and round, and you hear, well, prices are down a bit from what they were, and this isn't a bad time, and interest rates are up, but it's still doable. So if you were advising somebody who was saying, I've been thinking about buying a house in Victoria, and boy, is this a good time, or have I missed the window, or is there a window around the corner I should be waiting for? What do you think, Tony Joe? You've seen a lot around this city. What do you think?
I will speak in regards to a set of clients that we're working with right now. And they came from the mainland and they struggled during the time when the market was busy. I think it was like last April or May or something. They were being outbid on everything. They had to write unconditional offers. Like I said at the very start here, very unhappy market for buyers. Then they decided to rent. And the market, of course, softened. And there are properties out there that had trouble selling, 3 months ago. We've had properties that have been on the market for longer than they should have, only because the market shifted and everyone was waiting for the market to hit the bottom, right? They're back. They came back a couple of weeks ago. And then all of a sudden now in Fernwood, we have houses in the $900 to $1 million range. Just this past weekend, 4 of them sold in multiple offers. To which I said, oh my goodness, where were we 3 months ago, right? And I have found this whole thing very interesting where we had buyers sort of at the peak, April of 2022, saying, when is this going to happen? When the market shifts, I'm going to jump right into the market. And then the tap turned off and they didn't jump into the market. They said, oh, we're going to wait because I think it's going to get worse. But as we tell people all the time, you can't time the market bottom because the only way you know when it hits the bottom is when it's on its way back up again. Right?
It's like guessing on the stock market.
You cannot, right? You cannot. So good time to buy. I think the best time would have been weeks, if not a couple of months ago. Is it a bad time now? I'm going to say no, because there's still properties out there that need to find owners. There's a lot of older inventory. By the way, you don't go lowballing in on a property that was just listed today. You do that with things that have been on the market for 2 months or 3 months because the seller has a very different mindset, right? But the bottom line is it's Victoria, guys. If it's a long-term plan and you're thinking of staying and not moving for a while, look what Victoria has to offer. And this just brings us right back to where we began. Everyone here has come from somewhere else. And as long as there's more people coming into the region than going out, combined with the fact that we don't have enough new inventory being built, we still got a supply issue. The market here will always be a good market.
Well, we certainly enjoyed having Tony Joe in the Rumble Room. We'll look forward to having him back again soon. And, it's always great to have these very hot topics to discuss and look at from all sorts of different vantage points. And we have another one, railways. And the Island Rail in particular, there was a decision made or not made by the federal and provincial government. They aren't going to move forward with funding right now for the ENN, a former ENN railway. That decision has been made. Also a decision made to turn over some land, John.
I think if a business made decisions the way government does, they'd be out of business, they'd be fired, they'd be canceled. Yet again, another decision. And what happened? Let's review. After years of work, including developing a business plan for a new rail service, years of work, a 10-acre rail bed is returned to the Nanu's First Nations north of Nanaimo. Ottawa has now left the discussion. I guess they don't like our West Coast lifestyle anymore. And the province has put up $18 million for a new round of discussions. Larry Stevenson and the Island Rail Corridor Foundation are clearly crushed. I don't know how else you can interpret this. Well, we hope to speak to Larry once they come up with plan B or C or D, and I hope it isn't another 10 years.
Well, let's just hope it isn't an E, John. But meantime, there is some possible good news. There's been talk of a $1.5 billion port and rail line established between Port Alberni and Nanaimo using a spur of the Island Rail. And we thought this was a chance to talk to Paul Robinson. His advocacy group, the Island Transportation Corridor Coalition, is still hoping that as one door closes, another one opens. Let's zoom him in. And now, joining us in the Victoria Rumble Room for the first time is Paul Robinson, and welcome to the program.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you taking the time to have me on.
Now, we've heard very clearly from the federal and provincial governments that they just aren't ready to make any money available for a new passenger and rail service on the island. And they've in fact given back a portion, not that huge a portion, but a portion of the land back to the First Nations band in Nanoose, north of Nanaimo. But now, as a door closes, another one apparently has opened. What do you think of this $1.5 billion proposal to combine shipping and rail, where the shipping would deliver goods to Port Alberni, to the harbor there, it would take the train across to Nanaimo, then ship on to Vancouver? Does this make any sense?
Well, freight was always part of the business case for the Island Corridor Foundation that was put forward in May of 2022 to the province. So there's nothing new under the sun when it comes to freight makes sense. So in general terms, I would say freight continues to make sense. It always did, it does now, and it always will. Having said that, the landscape has changed. A lot of the people that I've spoken to up until March 14th have asked what happens after March 14th. And my response has always been, up until March 14th, the question is if we should have a resurrected rail corridor, and why should we have a resurrected rail corridor? And my response to them was that after March 14th, we don't know what the future will look like, but the conversation will be very different. So there's a lot of things that we knew before that have been clarified. There's a lot of things that we know now that we didn't know before. For example, the decision by the province was not a no to rail. The decision was a recognition that the Snanas First Nation will be getting their land back. And this is something that I think that they've been pursuing for many years.
A couple of weeks ago, several First Nation bands walked away from the table of rail supporters. It seemed at that moment, the deal was dead. So would you agree that if rail does return, it will be a different rail service? You've kind of answered that already. And perhaps a service that only covers the South Island corridor.
Well, I think it's important not to get too much into solutioning. That's what this $18 million is for, is to find out, based on all levels of government, whether it's regional, First Nations, provincial, or federal, what is the future based on all of the stakeholders at the table. And this is the interesting thing, is those conversations should have been taking place all along. What we need to know now is, given this announcement, that the provincial and federal government have all but admitted that they have not adequately engaged with all stakeholders, particularly First Nations up until now. A lot of people are wondering, what have they been doing for the past 18 months? September 2021 was the time when the Supreme Court of BC said that the decision will be made on March 14th. It must be announced by that time. The province said that they were engaging with the feds. The province said they were engaging with First Nations. And then the March 14th comes up and it doesn't look like those conversations were happening. And I think that a lot of people are asking a lot of questions. They've stated that this decision will be reconciliation first. That's not news. It should have been reconciliation first all along. What's changed there? This $18 million in funding. This corridor has probably been one of the most extensively studied pieces of real estate in Canada for the past 20 years. So how will this $18 million that's being spent make anything different? What's changed? I think a lot of people don't know what's changed. By all accounts, it appears the federal government has now left the room. How did the province let that happen? That's another question. When will this $18 million become available? Who will be engaged? When will they be engaged? How will they be engaged? What's the definition of success? This decision is no decision.
So, John, we had a chance to discuss the trains, and it one of our longer shows in a while, but we want to get all this stuff fitted in nicely into our format. And speaking of the format, we want to tell our viewers once again about how they can regularly follow the Rumble Room on our wide variety of platforms.
It'll be my pleasure, Robin, and my last blast. Business, start looking after business, the heartbeat of the community. The heartbeat of the Victoria Rumble Room is on our mothership, which is on our Facebook page. We also have a Twitter feed, very active. All of our videos are hosted on YouTube. And we have activity on Facebook groups, as well as Instagram and TikTok. Come on board and voice your support for business in the local communities. And with that, I'm your happy internet oracle today, Johnny Jurisic.
And I'm tuning you in, John. I'm tuning you in. And as the oracle proclaims, rumble on.